So talk to me about your P Mauriat story. Like, how did you get associated with the brand?
Well, I had known of the brand peripherally from some of my friends and peers and people that I look up to on the scene, Adam Larson and Benny Benack and Terrell Stafford, amongst the many others on the roster, Jason Marshall. And I was sort of, looking for a new horn, a new primary instrument on the tenor. And I started experimenting at conferences like the Gen Conference and, NAM and just kind of, reaching out to different companies, introducing myself and trying out the instruments. And it was sort of an overwhelming process because I had been on my Mark VI since I was 13 years old.
Oh, wow. Holy cow.
Yeah, but I knew that I wanted to make a change with my sound and I wanted to work with a company to get a new instrument. And so I had only heard good things about P Mauriat. The more people I asked around, it was good blood and good vibes. And I sort of kept narrowing it down. And so it was a longer process of just getting to know, the team and getting to know the artists and asking, what has that relationship looked like? And because I had a relationship with Van Doren, I had experience with what does endorsement relationship look like? What does that even mean?
Right.
So I knew that I was looking for a company that really puts the focus on the artist first and supports what they're about, their music and their career. And that is, first and foremost what P Mauriat supports and represents, I think, which I think is lacking in this industry right now and very, very important to the health of the community and the art form. I think, there's so much focus on this sort of industrial complex of music education, but in an industry where there's nowhere to go, like what are we feeding this into? So I very much appreciated that focus of P Mauriat. And then most importantly, I just really fell in love with the instrument. And so it seemed like a very natural fit. And luckily you guys were interested in me. So
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that artists come to us or we come to artists for a whole host of different reasons. And one of the things that was really interesting about you, besides the fact that you can shred, is that you were looking for a much more holistic experience with that relationship. It wasn't just, hey, I want to do some clinics, or hey, I need a horn. It was on a completely different level. And that's interesting to us because we have people ask all the time, hey, can I have an endorsement? Can I be an endorser? And that's fine, but we're looking for a different level too. And that's what was so, so attractive about, and is so attractive about working with you. So, so you play a 66 RGL, which is a roll tone hole horn. It's not off the beaten path. It's a very popular horn for us, but amongst a lot of artists, it's not the one that most pick. Yeah. I was actually really intrigued that you picked it. So I kind of want to know what made you pick it.
Yeah, it's funny too, because every time I talk to the other artists, they're like, oh, are you playing, this horn or that horn? I'm like, nope. And when I first played the instruments, I think it might have been NAM. I don't know. It was one of those, it might have been Midwest. I just felt like the other ones were a lot brighter. And again, they might have been more similar to a Mark VI sound, which might be why it's more popular with like, professionals to play the other options like the 76 or the more pro, what are called pro models. But I felt like I wanted to actually get away from that. I wanted to completely throw myself into something different and new because if you keep hearing the same sound, you're going to keep making that sound. And so I needed for myself to open up my sound and just to new possibilities. And this one, to me, it's not necessarily modeled. It's not like a copy of any particular horn as much. Like it has elements of the Selmer, but it has elements of a Conn in that it's like big and fat and
Yep.
wide. And so I really liked that. It didn't feel like a copy as much as this is a new horn and
Right.
it's its own thing.
Yeah, it's you said the magic word. To me, it's a con on, like, it's not a con on steroids. It's a con with modern key work, but it has that ability to be really, like, have this big, huge, thick sound, like a good 10M has. And so, yeah, that was just, I've always wanted to ask you that question, because I thought for sure, I knew that horn that we sent was really good. I knew the other one we sent was really good, but I was like 90% sure it's gonna be the other horn.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And I pride myself in picking pretty well. So that's cool though. So you said you've had your six since you were 13 years old. Was that your first pro horn?
Yeah. I had a con before that,
okay.
but it wasn't. It was a kind of an intermediate student con. It wasn't like a really nice con. It wasn't as old. So the Mark 6 was my first pro horn, and I got it. All my friends were getting Mark 6s, like Selmers. It was a very strong culture of jazz and jazz education in Seattle, where I grew up, and it was sort of, you're outgrowing your student instrument. And back then, Selmers were way more easy to come by. There was a music shop in Seattle, that Northwest Winds, that they had a huge inventory of Selmers, and so because they were so readily available and the price was so much lower back then too, it just made sense. Like, that's what everyone was telling me what you should do. Like, oh, you have to get a Selmer. So I tried a few out at the shop, and just fell in love with that one, and had been playing it ever since, until I was I don't know, 30 or so.
The ripe old age.
Yeah.
30 or so.
30 or 32.
Gotcha. So, okay, cool. On your Instagram page, you have saxophonist, composer, activist, she, her. And I wanted to kind of talk about the activist portion and how that informs not just how you play or how you write, but who you are. And if you could talk, a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't really understand that word, and then realized it had been a part of my identity for a long time. I always felt like, how do I explain this? I think being a female instrumentalist at all, but especially a woman in jazz, every time you perform, it's sort of an act of protest, or even if not protest, just like goes against what most people's expectations are. And so, my experience with music has been honestly just filled with lots of challenge and trauma. And on top of that, then to still be facing this element of surprise every time I perform, even though I'm like performing around the world, and like it's like, just
sort of, you can play.
Yeah. And to very extreme degrees sometimes, which I'll say for a later interview. But so at some point, and I started to be more conscious about, how do I want to speak about these issues? How do I want to help change the community for the better? Obviously, Women in Jazz Organization is a part of that. In my music, I'm always composing about like whatever I'm thinking about, whatever's like, on my mind. And so as these things became more conscious, I started writing music about it. I released The Future's Female, which is very much themed around that existence.
Right.
And, I've been going to protests since I was a teenager, but, in the wave of the Me Too movement, attending protests with that. And now it's continuing with Black Lives Matter, and,
sure.
and before that, Occupy Wall Street. So I think, it is a part of who I am just as a person, but it also, I didn't choose, I don't get to choose that my existence as a woman in jazz is offensive or surprising to many people. So that's just who I am. And so I have to accept that. And so whether I want it to be a thing or not, it is. And I think it's important to leave the world a better place than you find it in. And so that means working for it. And part of that is musical work, and part of that has to be community work, social work. And for me, right now I'm focusing that primarily in the music, because that's my community, that's my life. But I hope that it transcends that. And when you play for an audience of other types of people besides musicians, and you say this song is, this is the title of the song, The Nasty Women Grab Back, and you see women in the audience very responsive to that, I think that is important, that voice, because that voice hasn't been expressed so much in jazz, and it gives more audience members a channel into the music where they can connect on a level that maybe they've never experienced. And I've had, young women come up to me, and I have a song that's called Me Too, and I played this song, I performed it, and she came up to me and she was like, I was crying the whole performance. She was like early 20s, and she was like, I didn't know feminist jazz existed, but I love it, Yeah. So it does definitely inform my music. And it's not that every song I write will be about those particular issues or with those titles, but I think it was important at some point to have a large portion of my work dedicated to that, and it will continue to influence the music because that's who I am and that's been my experience. So I think anybody honestly composing and improvising on any level, their work is influenced by who they are and the experiences that they've gone through. And so for me, those are going to be very much about gender issues, especially in jazz. Sure.
And of which there are umpteenth number of, and I mean, I remember that growing up and going through school and oh, no, she could play. And there's thinking of that now, 20 years in the rear view, it's like, yeah. Even that, just uttering that is like ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's like absolutely often the best of it.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, that's an endorsement. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, it kind of boggles my mind now, but it's one of the reasons I was curious to ask that question.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned WeJo, Women in Jazz organization. And so, can you speak a little bit to why it's important to level that playing field? Kind of beyond the just the obvious, but especially in jazz or in music, it's not just the jazz genre that has massive issues with gender. I mean, this is, in every opera orchestra, classical venue, jazz venue that I know. Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. And it affects the whole industry. If you look at who are the jazz writers or the sound engineers or the music photographers, or every facet of the industry is male dominated. I think, so the first answer is we need to level the playing field because everybody wants the music to be better. We want the music to grow, whatever type of music you're talking about. Music is a beautiful thing that enhances everyone's lives. And so we obviously, as a human race, we want art to thrive. We want music to thrive. And as musicians specifically, we want the industry to thrive. We want more audience members. We want people to be paying more for music, going to hear live music more, buying music more. And we want more support. And obviously, if it's a better product, it's going to be easier to do that, I think. And we want to reach more people. So with those common goals in mind, how do you increase the success of something? The content itself, if you have more people contributing, naturally it's going to get better over time. And the more voices you have, the better. And so if you are only representing half the population, like that's half the potential of the music. And
Right.
as we just discussed, in terms of reaching audience members, not everybody's going to see themselves in that jazz hero of that whatever dude, right? Some people are going to connect to the music that women are making, and it might not even be about their gender. It might just be
Right.
about the music that that individual happens to create, but we wouldn't have heard it if they hadn't had a chance to share it and hadn't been encouraged to work on their craft.
Right.
So that's the most important reason, I think. And as we get into like how do we do that, we get to other trickle down like benefits, side effects, such as, you know, young girls seeing more options for themselves. In the same way, it's important to have a female president at some point, because
Mm-hmm.
what happens is the young girl sees something that they can look up to, a role model, and they say, I'm going to aim for that. And even if their path gets taken in a different direction, that means that they're aspiring to something greater for themselves, and they're seeing more options of what they can do with their lives. So it actually benefits society as a whole, not just the music industry. We get into the idea of scarcity mentality or abundance mentality, which I think jazz really suffers from. You know, jazz is not a thing like orchestra where there's only a limited number of literal jobs available. Right. Jazz should be infinite, and there should be room for all of us to participate. And, you know, that goes for any type of freelance artist in any genre. Like,
absolutely,
infinite options for people to create instrumental music. And when we pit ourselves against one another, you know, we're only hurting ourselves, because then it's saying like there's not room for both of us, and it's like, well, then that's really harming yourself.
Right.
Know? So I totally agree.
And the thing is, it's, you know, to borrow a book title from Simon Sinek, music is an infinite game. Nobody wins at music. Like, there's not, especially in jazz, nobody wins jazz. Like, you're not going to go and, I'm the best, I won. That's not how it is. Yeah. Even though there are competitions, and obviously they have to, you know, that kind of jazz competitions have all the time.
Yeah.
Nobody's winning it. You know, there's no world champion.
Totally.
There is room for everybody. So, so I want to change directions a little bit. I am married to a clarinetist. I am a clarinetist. I'm also a saxophonist, but and I you know, you are married to Lucas Pino, who is a phenomenal saxophone player in his own right. What challenges does that bring, especially in a one-bedroom apartment in Harlem?
It is extremely challenging. You know, there's just the logistical like space issue of like practicing and negotiating sound. And you know, in New York, it's like all musicians struggle with this a little bit, just with neighbors and stuff like that. But you know, in terms of, I think the most challenging part is it forces you to face your own relationship with music in a different way, right? Like, it's very confronting to hear somebody practicing the same instrument, and it could be confronting to hear another person practicing like any instrument, but especially when it's just so close to home,
right?
You know, we still struggle with this, and you know, that's fine. We can talk about that, and but I think the great part of it is that it's made us over time face that idea of like, what is my relationship with music? We can't compete, because that goes against our interest of marriage, like to support one another and be happy for each other's success. And this is directly related to that abundance mentality, which is like, I want you to succeed. I want you to be the best saxophonist you can be, and I want to be the best saxophonist I can be. And there should be room for both. And it kind of like twins, you hear about twins defining against each other, and they end up different than if they're separated at birth. Then they end up
Right.
very similar. So I think we definitely influence each other, because you can't help but like hear what the other person's practicing, or we talk
Sure.
about music a lot. But at the same time, maybe it helps us feel more secure in like the things that we are really about musically. Like, this is my identity. You know, I don't need to be always working on the same things that he's working on, or vice versa.
Sure. Yeah.
But it definitely, you know, being around each other so much in quarantine, like it's definitely given me more like, oh, I'll just practice that. He's practicing that. I don't even have to think about what I need to practice, because I'll just, you know. So.
That's funny. I don't know that it's necessarily done that for me and Audrey. She still sheds way more than I do, but yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So now kind of like to the back half of the questions. These are the more, I wouldn't say philosophical. Like, these are the meaty questions that the casual fan is like, might want to know. So who's the player in your sphere that's so automatic that when they come out like with a new album, or they're back before COVID, like they were playing a week at some place, you're like, nope, I don't need to know, I'm going, or I'm buying that album. I have, don't even need to hear any of it.
Well,
is somebody like that for you?
It's such an interesting question. I have mixed feelings, because I think as I get older, that has changed a lot. Like, when I first moved to the city, there were like at least 10 people like that, where it's just like, oh my God, I have to go.
Yeah.
And then, the thing is, over time, like, you start to realize, like, these are humans, they're not gods.
Yep.
And not every project they do is going to be the same level of
yes.
And
right.
So there might be somebody new that I haven't heard live, that they have a new project that's going to make me go crazy, like so exciting. And then maybe one of my old standbys has a new project that I'm not really into.
Yeah, sure.
And then you start to feel guilty, and you're like, oh, like I should be really excited about this, but for some reason I'm not. So I kind of reserve judgment, and I am trying to keep up with releases, and so that way I know like what a project sounds like. So if I do have the opportunity to see it live, I know like what that project is. And I definitely have a bunch of saxophonists that I just love their playing, and so I think I would give it a shot even if I didn't know the project. Like,
gotcha.
But I always hate getting into names, because even like the question of like career influences, because I feel like it gets so long that it's like funny. And I feel similarly that like I think everybody out there who we know about is doing something worth listening to. And even like I've gone to shows that I didn't like very much, and it's made me inspired, it's made me think about music differently, or it's shown me like, oh, I want to present myself in contrast to that this way. Or so I think there's something to be learned as a musician from anything that's being put out there. But I obviously do have things that I love, but I'm going to reserve my public announcement of what those things are.
But you're right. When I don't dig something as much, I have the same feeling of guilt, of like, almost like, what am I not getting about this? Like, maybe I'm just not, should I listen to it again? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I listen to it again. I'm like, nope, that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So,
and it could be the chemistry of those particular musicians, or maybe even just the mental state of the leader, like maybe their connection to that material, or there's so many, I mean, as humans, there's so many variables. Or maybe
absolutely.
Maybe just a bad night, or maybe we're just not getting the thing that they're really about.
Right.
And that's okay. And it's funny because it goes back to our talk about representation in the music, which is like, just because you're not connecting with it doesn't mean somebody else won't make it their new best favorite.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people will go. I'm remembering a concert in particular that I saw that was, I won't say who it was, but the first half, so basically opening up for this big act, was Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter and their duets album. And everybody else was there for the other person, and I was there for that.
Yeah.
Because that album, that's one of those that, and I feel comfortable that, I don't hold many people up on that sort of deity status, but those two, I kind of do. And so I just remember, I remember watching both halves of the concert, and I was sitting behind the stage in this particular venue. It was behind the stage, and so I could see the audience's reaction to what they were being presented.
Yeah. And
at the end of Herbie and Wayne's set of maybe 40 minutes, you could hear a pin drop. People were transfixed on what was happening. And then the big act came out, and it was, nobody could care less. and it was
yeah. And now that you say that, I'm thinking about it, and I guess when you first asked the question, I immediately thought about young people, but in reality, to answer your question more accurately, definitely Wayne Shorter. Mm-hmm. And any living legend like that, if I heard that they were performing, Wayne Shorter happens to be my favorite of all time, but Wayne or Benny Golson or any of these, Jimmy Heath just passed away, but he was one of those like people who they shaped the music, and they're continuing to shape the music, and you can hear it in their sound when you hear them live. And it's like, I would definitely drop whatever to go hear them if I can. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So this is my favorite. I love this question. Next question, because it definitely exposes everyone I ask it to. Who is your first guilty pleasure saxophonist?
I don't know how to take this question. I'm like, because I feel like it's such a political answer. Like if I say somebody, what makes them a guilty pleasure?
Yeah. I mean, well, you could, because there's very easy answers to this.
Okay.
I think most people would consider a guilty pleasure saxophonist, but
I think my real answer is I probably don't have any. I was a very straight ahead purist from the beginning.
Okay.
But one of the people that I was most listening to from the beginning was Stanley Turrentine. And
okay.
That is somebody, not necessarily guilty pleasure, but outside the box of what most people have in their like normal influence.
Yeah.
And it can get towards the side of, I guess, what the precursor of like what maybe went to smooth jazz.
He was playing a lot of like not hardcore funk, but it was definitely poppier type stuff, but it was all in that Texas tenor vein. Yeah.
So
that's a really good answer. I love that.
That's like the closest thing, I think.
I love that question. All right. So I've not asked this before of anybody, but I'm curious to know, because my kids are with their friends figuring out what their alternate name was, what their parents were going to name them if they did, what were your parents going to name you if they didn't name you Roxy?
So
or did they name you Roxy?
They named me Roxanne, and it was going to be Roxanne. And when they told my grandma, my dad's mom, what they had chosen for the name, she said, as long as you don't call her Roxy, that's a horse name.
Horse name?
A horse name.
Oh, a horse name. Okay.
I guess like Chicago, like that type of what Roxy represented to that generation.
Yeah. Okay.
But then my mom was like, no, her name's gonna be Roxanne. But then she said, as soon as I was born, it was obviously that was my name, Roxy. So it was funny. But they didn't have any alternates for if it was a girl, and they waited to see what gender I was going to be. If I was a boy, they were considering Alex or Zach. They wanted like an X or a Z.
Or a Z, yes. Yes. Very consonant. I got it. Okay. And last question. What's the one thing I didn't ask, but I should have?
Oh, man.
Or many things, but.
I don't know. I think the big question on everyone's mind is like, how are you staying motivated during COVID? Mm-hmm. And I don't think you should have asked it because I don't have an answer. But I do think it is something we're all struggling with. And I think, kind of, as an extension of what we talked about earlier, just like what this time is forcing me to do is think about what I want my relationship with music to be. And it's really providing more space to look at that and look at like, what do I want to be working on musically? Because during the hubbub of normal life, it can be very externally dictated, like this gig coming up, you have this recording coming up. And so you just you could keep following the carrot and working on whatever's coming up.
Right.
But to take a step backwards and actually plan, like, I want to work on this because I want to get better at this.
Yeah.
And that could be saxophone, it could be music, it could be composition, it could be life. So I don't have the answer yet, but that's been something I've been thinking about a lot. And just like, going back to what we talked about, it reinforces the idea that like you have value. Do you value yourself? And what do you want to offer? Like, if Roxy is the best version of Roxy that she can be, what am I offering that isn't being offered by somebody else? Like, rather than, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, it's like, what do I really want to put out there, and what kind of musician and person do I want to be?
The way I've thought about it is, it's almost like we've had this sort of existential squeeze going on, and it's, and when you're a freelance musician, you're always on the hustle. So this has forced everybody to kind of let go. And I think those who have, I wouldn't say made the most of it, but who are being the most present in it are asking themselves the same questions you're asking. And to me, it's your voice, the one thing that nobody else has. No matter how much you two play in the same room or play the same stuff, you're never going to sound the same, because you're you, he's him. And, our voice as musicians is the most authentic thing that we can offer. People can replicate it, but it's not going to be the genuine article.
Definitely.
So,
I always tell my students that. They're like, what do you think about like, playing licks or like copying somebody too much? And I'm like, don't worry, you're never going to sound like John Coltrane. Like,
right.
But it's true. It's like you're only going to be you, and that work is going to help you become you.
Yeah. Well, Roxy, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And we'll talk again soon.
Okay.